Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. And it's time for another sequel review. I both hate and love these because on one hand, it's great that indie authors will repeatedly trust me with their work and continue on with the series, and it gives me an excuse to finish series. But on the other hand, these videos don't get as many views because obviously I tend to spoil previous books in the series to review the next one, so it's a trade-off. Today, I am reviewing 1,000 Secret Sorrows by Matthew Cagle. This is the sequel and the finale of the duology, The Loom of Sorrows, also the name of the first book. And this is very, very, very sci-fi. For those of you who either haven't read the book and just want to watch or have read the book and need a refresher, this is all about a very far future Earth in which humans have recently returned back to Earth after leaving. Years and years and years beforehand, storms had ravaged the entire sphere of the globe and they were forced to leave. Thankfully, or maybe not thankfully, depends on who you ask, this race of aliens they called the Twigs, because yes, they literally looked like a bundle of sentient twigs, offered them another planet to go to called Joshua 20. Problem was, Joshua 20 was a hellscape. It was not meant for human life. Most humans had to live underground, forced in either Twig cities or in these slums called Agartha between them, and it was scraping to get by no matter where you were. Now, this man called Enon actually traveled back through to the old Earth and discovered that it was still fertile and good to support life. Now, many other people had gone through and never returned, but he did. So the question is, why him? Why did he return? Why did he not stay on that fertile Earth? What did he go back for? And in our quote-unquote modern day, our protagonist, Master Keldon, whose real name we still don't know, has the memories of Enon stuck in his brain and they're slowly killing him. He has to uncover why Enon returned before his brain basically goes kaput. And the sequel begins with Master Keldon basically wandering around Joshua 20. Now, he is protected by the twig robes he wears as a master, so it's not the same emphasis as the Enon flashbacks he has about the suffering, but this is still a pretty depressing book. A very depressing book, and that's saying a lot because the first one set the bar very high or low. I'm not sure which it would be, but it's depressing. And the flashbacks are still probably my favorite part of the book. They were in the first one as well. There's just something about the way they're inserted in the story. Well, I mentioned it in the review of the first one, but a lot of cases it would just be, the same word would repeat in a couple times in a sentence and you'd suddenly be in a flashback. However, the formatting was easy enough that you could always tell when the flashback began, which I really appreciated. The flashbacks versus the regular story were two different fonts, so you always knew when the flashbacks happened, which is a pretty brilliant way to do that kind of thing, and I think I low-key want to do that in dream sequences moving forward because it just made reading it so much easier than constantly being thrown to the side of, wait, is this a thing? What? It worked out really well. The biggest thing I was struck by when I began the story is it felt like we were really close to the answer really early in the book, because within 50 to 100 pages, he's getting closer and closer and closer, but there's over 200, close to 250 pages in the book. So I'm like, why are we this close this early? But I remembered as things went along that the first book actually set up a lot of side mysteries or little mysteries that I still wanted to see fulfilled. Things like, where did the storms come from that kind of forced humanity to leave? Why did the Twigs interfere in the first place? What is our protagonist's original name? There's a lot of those things going on that kept you going even when we got really close to figuring out the big reveal. And the big reveal took its sweet time. I usually am pretty decent at guessing reveals, and I guess I guessed it in a way. I'm trying not to spoil things, obviously, but I think I guessed a close version of it, but the full thing wasn't exactly what I was expecting. But also low-key kind of worked, and I like how we're related back to the modern day. And it's difficult to talk about this book because there are so many little mysteries that are fulfilled in this. This is definitely a book that focuses on big philosophies of life and such, and is humanity worth saving and all of those kind of things. And the first book touched on other big themes like what do you do when you find out your religion isn't wholly pure. I did like a lot of the city-states and the different religions. I almost wish that we'd had a little bit more time just to wander around this new Earth. However, I understood that that would have just been a random side story, and that focusing on Enin and the reason for the world as is was probably more important. I also appreciated that our protagonist's home life came into effect a lot more here. In the first one, it kind of just felt like he had a wife and daughter just to have one. It didn't necessarily feel like all that important. It felt a lot more important in this story. Made him feel a lot more likable as a character, that his wife and daughter were so much on his mind in this one. It was actually still quite as deadly or as dire as the first one. Some pretty intriguing twists and turns that took place. And again, it's hard to talk about any of the reveals without spoiling something, but I will say that it takes until the very end to reveal why the twigs interfered, and it's out of left field for me. I still am not sure if the actual answer was meant to be symbolic of something that I don't know, or if that literally was their thought process, because you don't learn a lot about the twig aliens. They're very much like chaotic neutral in most things, in most references, which I low-key liked. That they definitely felt proper alien-esque. You know, I mentioned before how I can get tired of aliens in sci-fi that just look like humans with a different default skin, or like an extra arm or an extra eye, and these are giant sentient stick bundles, so it definitely felt alien. I will also say probably the bigger struggle I had came near the end. I am a sucker for endings. I love the perfect ending. It always just does the story well. This ending felt a little rocky for me. I felt like the book could have ended a couple chapters earlier, and you could have slipped in the reason for the twigs and what they did earlier, because the last couple chapters actually read like a very long epilogue, like several chapters worth of epilogue, in which new characters are introduced and you're thrown even farther into the future, and there's this very, very, very general overview of what is literal centuries of time and space travel, and it all felt like a little bit too much, and you can't really introduce a new character well in the last like 4 chapters of a book. It doesn't work all that well. So beyond that, I really appreciated this. If it had ended a couple chapters earlier, I would have been thrilled. Pretty much everything was wrapped up. Every mystery that the book set up, either in the first one or at the beginning of this one, was answered. It's up to you to decide whether or not that answer was satisfactory. Personally, I kind of like those stories where it's like, you know what? You're not going to always get the perfect answer that makes sense. Sometimes you have to accept that the world is random and that's just how it's going to be. I mentioned before in the first one, and it's the same in this one, this is not a book for people new to sci-fi or people that prefer the space opera side of sci-fi. Now, I do love space operas, but I can do either. But this is definitely more focused on long periods of time and big ideas as opposed to wholly focusing on character development. So if you're more into the character development, this might not be your taste, although I will say this one had a lot more character development as a whole than the first one. I think I might like this one more than the first one. I'm not entirely sure. I gave this one 4 stars. Same with the first one. It was really well done, especially love those, the visions and the way the format of the book makes them so easy to read. I also love that the book has illustrations of the finger nodes, because those are a little hard to imagine the first time it explains them. And in general, pretty much only the last bit lost it for me, where it felt like a little bit too much was added on at the end. And low-key, I do still wish this was all one book, mostly just so that I could have gotten all read and wouldn't have had so many on my to-review list. But you know what? I am very grateful that Matthew Cagle sent me this sequel. If I have read another book and given it over 3 stars, I usually hope to get the sequel. So I would love to read anything from Matthew Cagle in the future. Again, this is probably a book more for people who already like sci-fi, not necessarily the best book for sci-fi beginners, but definitely one that I would recommend for anyone that loves the genre. Now, if you are an indie author and are interested in a review like this one, please email me. I will have my email down in the description below. I will also have my review policy down there. Please give that a read through. It answers a lot of questions and saves us a lot of time. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.